Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is a clean and simple watercolor card. I'm using this Altenew set called Golden Garden. Each of the stamps has 2 steps, or some of them only have 1 actually, and there's a really nice cheat sheet that's easy to follow. So I'm going to start by taking one of the 2-step stamps, and I'm going to be stamping it in 2 different colors of distress ink. The first ink that I'm going to use is Forest Moss, and I'm going to ink up just the stem. I'm using Canson XL Mixed Media 98-pound watercolor paper. It's very bright white and it's pretty thin. So once I get my Forest Moss on there, I'm going to take my absorber and take off some of it that should be the flower color. And then I'm also dabbing the stem a little bit because there's going to be some other stems in front of it and I don't want it to be too dark. So I'm going to clean off the stamp, and now I'm going to ink it up with some fired brick on the part that is the flower part. And it's a little bit hard to do here. You could color it with a marker, but you're going to get a better impression with using the ink pad. So I'm just going to wipe off the stem portion, and then I'll stamp it down. And what I'm looking for here is a dark color. And then the second stamp will be a lighter color. So here I'm following my directions, and it's pretty easy to line up. So I'm going to get it right there on top. And I have Candied Apple. It's one of the newer colors, Distress inks. And it's just a kind of a bright, lighter red. So I want to get 2 different colors of red on this flower. Now once I get that stamped, I'm going to go ahead and work on this flower before stamping anything else. I have an aqua painter, and you can see I've got a tissue off to the side so that I could keep my colors pretty clean. And you can see I'm going over the candied apple, and I'm also sort of spreading it a little bit into the white area. I'm also trying to take my fired brick and spread that out a little bit too. Now you don't want to do too much at this point. I'm going to come back later and add a little bit more detail. The point is just to get some of that ink blended, and you can see I took a little bit out of that petal as well. I'm filling in some of the gaps and just kind of making sure that everything kind of looks like it flows together. I really tried to keep some of the flower petals white, so you can see I left a little bit of white in each of these petals. And I'm being careful to wipe off the color on my brush before I hit those white areas so I don't get too much red, because I definitely want it to look like there's fired brick, there's candied apple, and there's white. There's this little piece down here that was red, and I'm not sure what that is, so I just sort of created a longish petal behind there. Now I'm going to stamp my second flower. This is also a 2-step stamp. I'm going to ink it up with my Forest Moss, the stem part, just like I did earlier. And for this flower, I'm using Spiced Marmalade. So I'm using the same stamp that I just stamped the stem with, and I'm just inking up the top portion of it with the Spiced Marmalade. And then the second step for this stamp is going to be Scattered Straw. So I'll get that lined up using my directions. I'll ink it up with some Scattered Straw, and then I will stamp it down. I decided to use my larger MISTI because I was hanging some of these stamps off the side. Okay, now I'm going to blend these out. And, you know, it's really interesting that some of my distress inks blend really well and some don't blend very well at all. So my Scattered Straw was okay blending. My Spiced Marmalade really did not want to blend hardly at all. But it's okay because this is just round 1, and I'm going to go back in and add a little bit more detail with markers. So I'm just doing the best I can, and I'm trying to leave some of the areas white. Next, I'm going to stamp some leaves, and I'm just stamping it all in Forest Moss. So I stamped it multiple times. I wanted it to come off to from the left side, and then also a little bit from the bottom. And I'm trying to keep all these flowers on the left-hand side to keep it nice and clean and simple. And I'm also rotating it a little bit so it doesn't look like I keep duplicating the stamp. So I have a little bit at the top here, and that'll be it. And this is all Forest Moss. I'm going to do some quick watercolor on these leaves. I've got peeled paint and Forest Moss markers. And this is going to be really easy. I'm not going to be too exact with it. So I've got the brush tip of my Forest Moss, and I'm just randomly applying color, like literally just going through it really fast, applying it to one side or the other side, a little bit up the middle, and just actually making it quite random. And then what I'm going to do is take my peeled paint, and I'm going to do that same exact thing, but I'm going to do it kind of on the other side and in different areas on the leaf. but I'm also going to be careful to leave white in between the colors, because that way they don't blend too much and I'm going to get some variety in shading. So next I'm going to grab my aqua painter and I'm going to be careful not to put too much water on it and also not to brush it too much. So I'm almost kind of swiping it up and down a few times and just trying to leave it. So it's kind of hard to just sort of do a little bit and leave it, but it actually looks a lot better if you don't do too much blending. So I'm just going to color in all of these, and you'll see that I left a little bit of white on each of the flowers, and I really think it helps to give it a lot more dimension. So this is all I'm going to be doing on these leaves. I'm not going to go back and add a second layer of color or anything like that. So I'm just doing this pretty quickly. I'm going to speed up the rest of this and I'll be back in just a minute. You could actually leave the card as is. I think it looks really pretty, but I decided to add a little more detail. So I have my fired brick marker and I don't have the candied apple marker. I just have the ink pad. So I'm going to put a little bit of ink on my craft mat and I'll pull it up with my aqua painter. So what I'm going to do is take the brush tip and I'm going to color in just a few areas. And my fired brick, I don't know if this is normal, but it seems really brown to me. So I'm just highlighting some of the areas, a line here and there, but not too much on the edges of this flower, and sometimes a little bit in the middle, and then also at the base of that center portion. And then what I'm going to do is take my aqua painter and I'm going to grab my candied apple. So I'm kind of doing this all at the same time, and I'm going to put some water over the fired brick that I colored using the aqua painter that has the candied apple on it. So I'm getting kind of all these colors mixed together, and I'm adding a little bit of extra color so that I have some variation, but I'm also being careful to leave those white areas white. Now I thought this petal needed a little bit more dark color in the middle, so I just drew a line right down the middle and then I just blended it out a tiny bit. You don't have to use an aqua painter, you can use a paintbrush and some water, but I just like the flow of the water through the aqua painter. I just feel like I have more control. Another thing that I decided to add, I'm all into the details here, is I took my fine tip and I added a few dots to the very center of this flower just to make it look like more of a real flower. All right, moving on to my other flowers, I'm going to use the Spice Marmalade and Scattered Straw markers. I'm using mostly Spice Marmalade. And again, I'm just drawing some lines here and there, and I'm going to blend it out with my aqua painter, being careful not to cover the whole thing with the water. So you can see I left some blank area in the middle that was previously yellow. And I'm working mostly around the base with just a little bit of color at the top. And you can experiment with what you think looks good. And it's okay to kind of have lines of color. The style of this stamp set is very sketchy, and so it's supposed to look kind of like a messy watercolor look. I think the hardest part about doing something like this is knowing when to stop, because you always just want to add a little bit more, blend a little bit more. So what I would recommend is to just kind of swipe with color, like I'm swiping, and then I'm just sort of looking at it, swiping again, and just being careful not to apply too much or push down too much on the brush. So have a light hand when you're applying the color. So I did all Spice Marmalade. I decided to go back in with a little bit of this Scattered Straw. I kind of wish I hadn't, because I think I covered up too much of the white and it really didn't add too much to this flower. So really all I needed was that Spice Marmalade marker. And just like I did with that fired brick fine tip, I'm going in here with my Spice Marmalade fine tip, and for some reason I can't get my paper to stay still, but I'm just highlighting the dark areas at the bottom and up the side a little bit, and then a tiny little bit up at the tip as well. Doing a card like this is a little bit different for me because I usually like to be pretty methodical, you know, doing the same technique on each and every petal and making everything very consistent. So this was kind of fun and a little out of the box for me. So some of these stems are made to be sort of blank in some areas, but I didn't really like that. So I went with my fine tip of the forest moss, and I filled in, well, some of it I had blotted out with my absorber because I didn't want it to be too dark. Remember on that first one. So I'm just filling in some of the blanks here, and it's just fine. It looks just like it had been stamped. I forgot the top a little bit, so I went in and added some up there. I pulled my sentiment from the Friendly Flower set by Simon Says Stamp. I've used this sentiment multiple times. It's just really pretty and thin and delicate. And so I stamped it in some Versa Fine Black Onyx ink just to the right of my flowers. And then I'm just going to take my panel. I'm just going to put some ATG tape runner on the back. And then I have a card base that's Nina Solar White, and I just put it in the lower left-hand corner of my MISTI and then lay my panel flat, and it lines up on the left corner. And that's the card for today. So pretty easy, and try not to work too much on it, and I think it'll come out nice. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.